welcome to the final juxtaposition lecture this semester. I'm thrilled to be here again. This is a weekly series of talks on contemporary cultural production at the Berlin University of the Arts. My name is Lukas Feireiss, and it's been my pleasure and my honor and my delight to invite various cultural producers from all walks of life here every week to speak about their work. To a rather heterogeneous group as well of students coming from all the studies and all the disciplines at the Berlin University of the Arts and beyond. And what I always say that what all of the speakers have in common, that they draw outside the lines, kind of they think outside the box, and they don't really fit into a single category, and some would also refuse disciplinary coherence. And this is also what I'm trying to do here, promote a transdisciplinary discourse outside of given norms, forms, and regulations. And that said, I'm very excited to have today Estonian artist Katja Novitskova joining us from Amsterdam. Thank you so much for being here, Katja.
Very happy to be here, Lucas. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, fantastic. So how are you?
I'm very good. I'm just sad this is not this is another online thing, but it is what it is.
I was kind of speculating that you might be in Berlin for this one, but plans...
I would have traveled just for the talk if it was possible to do real life.
Yeah, but we'll do it then maybe in the next semester.
Yeah.
But how was your day? What are you currently working on?
I am working on hopefully very boring answer, but a practical one. I'm working on something that hopefully will become my solo exhibition in Berlin again in the fall in the gallery. And I'm just sort of sketching it out at the moment. And just a trillion other little things like preparing for the talk and taking care of my child. That's what I'm up to. But mostly I'm just, I have like a very fun but very heavy moment at the moment where I have to come up with a new body of work, and I'm forcing myself to make it something I haven't done before. And it can go in several different directions. And so, of course, that's like a uncertain, scary moment, but hopefully I'll be able to pull it off. And conceptualize for myself which direction it would be. So it's still really early, although I don't have really that much time. But yeah, this is where I'm at, because after kind of finalizing a circle of body of work from the last 10 years, let's say in 2019, when I had this exhibition in Berlin for Preis der Nationalgalerie. And then it was COVID and I had a child, and now I have to kind of come back with something new that developed after those events. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, thanks.
And the world has changed a lot since then.
The world has changed a lot, and it's actually a very, even if it's precarious, but exciting moment to be talking to you today. So thanks for taking your time. Let me quickly introduce you also to the students. Many of them obviously know your work, many don't. As I said, the student body comes really from all the different disciplines. You're based between Berlin and Amsterdam.
Well, I've been until like until basically late 2019. I've been mostly in Berlin, and then now I'm mostly in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and you have a very eclectic practice in your work. You explore somewhat you explore images and imagery of, it always says like technology-driven narratives of really the most diverse online data sources. So you really interrogate pictorial messages, and somehow also at the intersection of where the technological and the biological somehow meet and coincide, to also bring an awareness to the tools of representation that are used to depict these kind of two realms and the meeting of them. and you often have extracted, kind of to describe your work from the outside, found online pictures and have blown them up into enormous kind of freestanding sculptures. And I think more recently you also focused more on AI generated images that kind of aren't visible to the human eye. But in all of that, you're blurring really the distinctions between media and disciplines. You work with digital collages and real one, sculptures and installations. I feel like this is like full circle also within this lecture series. And I'm very thrilled to have you with us. So welcome, Katja.
Thank you again.
What I wanted to say is, we discussed before, you prepared a little presentation for us, and we'll kind of have made a good experience with a mixture of kind of questions to get into the topic and the presentation. Maybe you can start with your presentation, and we can ask questions in between and also afterwards.
Yes, so first I'd like to say that since I've been working over what I'm going to be showing over 13 years, it's very difficult to make a short presentation. And I've given I've asked Lukas about sort of the type of students that will be here today, and if people knew my work or not, and the answer is sort of probably some do, some not, and also it would be interesting to start with like a few early things, really early things when I was myself a student, and then I would jump through them into towards like my serious career and today, what I'm doing today. And I would like to, you see the menu with everybody? Or is this?
Yes. No, we see the good now.
How can I turn it away? Like this? Yes. All right, so I'll start, right?
Yep, please.
I will say that thank you for a description also of my work. It's very difficult to put it maybe in a few sentences, but maybe also as I go along through my presentation, it will become clearer what it is. And also, I don't have clear cuts and boundaries between projects. So one sort of floats into the other, and it will be also clear I'm not sort of distinguishing eras of series or works. But this is what I'm showing is is the first installation I made for when I was studying graphic design in Sandberg Institute in 2009. And why I want to show you is very low resolution image, but kind of from the early days, I've been interested in kind of what at that time digital image was becoming, and what it was becoming is also very nicely outlined in the essay of Hito Styrol on poor images, where she basically mentions that there's so many images available now that their kind of value diminished, and they became so-called poor images where everything is kind of low res, kind of shitty looking, also mixed with historical, mixed with CGI, mixed with photographic, mixed with kind of commercial and non-commercial. And in this new reality, somehow a level emerges where manipulating the existing images becomes a practice in itself. And these are kind of the sketches and collages I was doing as a student, and you can see like they're all over the place. And this is my vaporwave collage from 2009. But eventually I ended up kind of narrowing it down to to the idea of ecology of images and ecology in the broader sense in relation to technology, how kind of the existence of these, millions and millions of images online is related to the actual world, the actual ecology outside through technology and through, obviously, people, through culture. And my graduation project for my master's was a book. It was the first. I graduated with a dummy of the book, with a sketch of a book, and then it was published shortly after by what was back then called Revolver Publishing, art publisher. And the idea behind the book was to kind of present my own perspective on this emerging new kind of scene of young artists basically making their work by re-editing or reformatting the content that already exists online. And back then, that was it was kind of the first year or so when this term post-internet showed up by and American art critic Gene McHugh. He started a blog called Post-Internet, a WordPress blog, and the artist Marisa Olsen, she kind of came up with the term, and I saw it around, flying around, and I decided that my book would be called Post-Internet Survival Guide, where I introduce this idea of ecology and survival guide and the kind of the term itself. And it was supposed to be a bit cheesy title, obviously. This is sort of like a little gif of what's inside the book, but I'll show you some spreads. And it's sort of funny how little changed in 10 years, over 10 years now, because some of the topics reflected in the book are still sort of really relevant, and basically the tension between technology and the emerging world and how everything depends on it. And actually, it's sort of depressing how little has changed. Because when I was making the book, I would kind of assume that that somehow things will go in a different direction. So back then, we had this like Google Brain idea or AI. This is an essay that Gene McHugh wrote, and the book was basically a curatorial project for me, but also an editorial project for me and an artistic project for me. Curatorial in the sense that it included works and screenshots from like Tumblrs from a lot of artists who I credited. And also I invited some people to write some text for it, like Gene and John Ruffman and some other people. I also kind of saw myself, because I was graduating graphic design department. I thought my kind of artistic voice is also heard in the layout of the book and in the editorial choices that I was making. And because I was sort of seeing this project as a stepping stone for me from graphic design into more fine art practice. So I really gave myself a lot of freedom to do whatever I want with it. There was no kind of, oops. Did somebody do that, or did I do that?
I think you did that.
I didn't do that on purpose. Okay.
But I like that you're coming out kind of in the art world has been actually more of a curatorial or kind of collaborative endeavor, no?
Yes, 100%. Because I also worked as a production manager in like a new media art space in Amsterdam when I was a student, and I was designing stuff for the institution, and I was helping to produce exhibitions and seeing a lot of art around, and kind of seeing this communal art development online. It kind of felt natural to try all of this at the same time. I curated I curated a few exhibitions that were like in a series already, let's say, more or less. And then I sort of stopped as soon as I had to really focus on my own artistic career, where it became kind of work. It kind of started to function. But this one I want to show is sort of the artist's name list. There was a lot of artists in the book.
Can I ask you a question, Katja, in
Yeah,
between?
sure.
No, because it's, I think, very fascinating that you're showing this. It was quite a groundbreaking work, but it's still a master thesis, so it's very inspirational for also students listening. No, that kind of your final piece at university can really be the entrance into the real world. Then, but I was wondering how you work with. I think there's like 50 artists in this book. No, so how was the work with all of your, let's say, peers at the time, or what was your
I
like
th-
biggest learning from that?
yeah, I think that's what I learned from working in this art institution, is just to email people who you want to work with. I emailed everybody, and I also have some critical distance now from the book, and I can sort of say that a few things I've done wrong doing it. I don't think I really emphasized how important other people's work is in the book, because a lot of people think it's just my book. And of course, there's a lot of people involved. And the other thing is that if you look at the names, it's 90% male names. And that was also something that I kind of naively, I haven't thought about it at all back then, because I was 25 years old and it was a different time, and it just like, I didn't think about it. I would never do such a thing, of course, anymore. And I would think about who I'm including in the book, and in a more deep way. But everybody who is in the book responded positively to be in it, and people really wrote some commission that I was not able to pay them anything for it. It was all voluntary, and also I borrowed money from my dad to publish it, and we printed it in Estonia in a cheap, good quality but cheap printer, black and white. And then, I kind of barely made that money back from the sales of the book. And certain shops that are famous in Berlin for selling art books never paid me from
Oh
the
yeah,
sales.
I
As
was
it usually goes, the shop starts from M and ends on O. But so
I know which one, but it was funny. I was looking for the book, but now it's selling for like 500 euros if you're trying to get a hold of it.
yeah, but then it's like I used to give them out for free, and they got stolen from my like design department and from people's houses. But the point is that, yeah, it was kind of I also didn't include everybody I wanted to include. The book would have been longer. There was a lot of people I couldn't include. So it became my graduation project, and this is an installation from my graduation project. And it was just like, I really thought of it as a kind of a time capsule for the moment, and for that year, for the discourse around then. And I, as you say, I really kind of wanted it to be something that will allow me to continue after the school ends. So when I graduated, I was immediately able to start like curating exhibitions around the book, because I curated one in Future Gallery in Berlin, and I don't have pictures here, but with some artists who were in the book, but also some artists who were not in the book. And this was the art in the installation. And then immediately after, I started to try like make artworks myself, more and more, because again, as an artist slash curator slash designer, I kind of had a freedom, and working in absolutely no budget project spaces, I was able to just put my own work in the exhibitions that I curate. And it was not even art yet; it was just something. And from the beginning, I always wanted to be able to translate a digital image into a physical object. So one of the first things I did was printing on canvas, printing digital images on canvas and just making these like little stone-looking sculptures with it that were just crumbled fabric, and with like a texture prints, so the 3D texture prints of stones and biological patterns. This was already 2012. And then I think this is the first commercial gallery exhibition I've ever been in. And the idea continued that I will kind of develop a sculpture practice, but using the digital images that I find online that I kind of modify through collage or through some sort of appropriative technique, and then I find a way to express them in the real world. And kind of maybe treating the physical objects the same way I'm treating the image. So for example, I would go to a media market and like think what I can buy there to make sculptures with, the same way I would Google something and find images that I would be making work with. Very simple, very primitive, let's say. I kind of not a fresh idea, but it made sense because until then I never had a physical studio. I always worked until then from a laptop in a bedroom. I think I got my first art studio early 2013 when I went into a Rijksacademy residency in Amsterdam. That was the first time I ever had an artist studio. So after I already had my first solo show. So I always thought this idea of adaptation to whatever I have is interesting. So I'm just adapting my practice towards whatever situation I'm currently in. And this is just a picture from a sketch of a book that I never published. But working with these digital images, I sort of noticed that, especially like kind of within the media landscape of Tumblr and early social internet, that certain images get viral, obviously, or get a lot of likes and shares. And certain images from these were images of like something that is bright and beautiful, or that is, kind of eye candy, this idea of an eye candy, or something very cute. And there's this sort of theory that people like images and they have this tricolor vision because as primates, they were supposed to recognize ripe fruit on the trees, the fruit that is bright red and orange, not green. And this is kind of where our primate vision has developed. And then I sort of started to primitively apply this idea towards art. And I made this little exhibition in London, using very also cheap materials, but I don't know. This is like a print of a Google Chrome logo at the time with an inflated yoga ball on it, deflated. And then this is a TV screen hanging on the wall with like a fabric print of parrots. And something you would always see in MediaMarkt is like all the TV sets are advertised with brightly colored nature documentaries. And so I would think of, okay, what happens if this becomes art? And then I made like a little creature using Nike push-up bars and a deflated yoga ball. And this all was just an experiment to figuring out how to merge something that is like, can be an image. In the end, the artwork exists to be photographed and to become an image also again on the internet. And maybe if it follows some sort of visual candy logic, it will get some sort of attention. If it's a visual meme, it will get some sort of attention. And I more and more looked into this field of stock images also, where the photographs are taken by the thousands and they're just kind of and they become already a product in itself. And they're used, there's no authors, they're just used for some sort of neutral commercial purposes. And I started to try to make works out of that. Kind of in the pop art logic, where you take the image and you use whatever commercial medium of the image holding you have at the moment. And back then already, the most kind of common medium for advertisement, physical advertisement, were these banners, different types of banners. But in trade fairs, you would find these cutout banners, or in cinemas. And I thought it would be interesting to print just a kind of a shitty digital image onto a huge aluminum board. Aluminum because it gives this screen shine. And what I wanted to capture is sort of human. I wanted to see if the image will work in the physical space, but also I wanted to isolate the signal, the form in the image that makes it this kind of strong, that gets attention. So it was kind of exploring attention economy in the early stages of it. And I wanted to see if the work itself becomes popular because it uses these kind of beautiful catching patterns. And in my case, from the beginning, it was nature, because I noticed again of this specific use of nature online that is still very strong, which is like if you go to Instagram, there's tons of profiles that are just using cute animals to something weird, and insane amount of views that is generated by it because there's something that is attractive about animals. And the works have been flat from the beginning, and they had this aluminum or black side that are just kind of like dead shapes on the other side. And for me, the dead shape is also as important sort of as the front shape, the back shape. And this is just from someone's old phone, but like kind of the work triggered something, and for me that was the interesting part, like kind of what it triggered from people. And so it became a series works, and that is just became kind of ongoing. And at some point this is a screenshot from BuzzFeed, this website that used to be very popular, and they always had this big arrow for trending topics. And this idea of trending and the idea of like economical growth or economical relationship to the image of the image was interesting to me, and I started to insert these huge giant growth arrows into like collages first. And then I started to make them physical using resin, and they kind of became artifacts in themselves, almost like trophies. And then it got out of hand, and I started to make them really big. And I had this always theory of, the relationship between, again, this and the actual outside world, and how, perhaps there's more images of certain animal than the animal that is left, like the actual number of animals left in the wild. And this idea of curves, of the arrows, and the kind of the curvature of growth and the crisis and deflation and inflation, again of the world in general, but also specifically of kind of something as immaterial as an image or content is very interesting. And this is like a mine, juxtaposed with a graph of Facebook activity. Any questions now? I'm moving.
Oh, sure. I have so many. I mean, maybe I'll keep it for later, but there's almost on an iconographical level. I'm very curious to kind of maybe later kind of dig into more like the arrow. I'm very fascinated with. There's certain signature traits that you have that I'd love to get into, that are somewhat between, it seems like all these like archaic elements meeting technological elements in this dialogue. I find very exciting. And the other thing I was thinking about, what kind of totally fits what you've been showing to this whole lecture series, where we have somehow, I don't know, I've been investigating various forms of collage actually as contemporary models of cultural production today. So from the first to the last lecture, there was somehow like a disruption of, let's say, conventional storylines, whether as a curator, an artist, or designer, or writer, through this kind of creative juxtaposition. Hence, also the title of this lecture series, of already existing elements, or of already existing narratives. Obviously, Nicolas Bourriaud was here as the author of Post Production, where he totally sees the artwork as, you know, just a simple moment in an infinite chain of contributions. And Susanna Kennedy 2 weeks ago spoke about her dramaturgical work, so writing a theater piece as basically sampling text from Twitter to I don't know, shows she watches on Netflix and philosophy books she reads, and she called it a dramaturgy of hyperlinks. And this kind of, and you're taking this now on the image level, basically.
Yeah, I see myself kind of like a filter, because there's no way, you know, we can see everything, but also there's no way we can grasp everything. There's too much information at the moment. And I think every person is forced to become their own filter, of like filtering what kind of media you consume, filtering what you let into your thoughts, and filtering how you respond to them, and filtering what you yourself produce, or like what you show. And I think the type of filtering each person does says a lot about them, but also says a lot about kind of what the situation we're forced into. And I understand this. There's, you know, you have to be aware of that on some level. I think making art at the moment, even if it's painting, you have to be aware, because there's just so much of everything. So I think that's just kind of what it is now. Everybody, on one way or another, has to think about these processing aspects of what's out there, and make some choices. So I made like a conscious choice, for example, of you know, almost not using any human representation, and not maybe speaking exactly about my, let's say, background, you know, ethnicity or social background. And I wanted to transition here from this first cycle of works that was using a very bright, very stock imagery kind of aesthetic, into kind of a darker period that started around 2015. And for me, what kind of I felt like I hit the limit with the bright and beautiful animal representations, and just putting them in the white cube that felt quickly expired, let's say, and I had to figure out something else. And I started to think broadly more into what other kind of images are out there that are perhaps are also being created in their thousands and thousands and millions, but they're not necessarily, they don't really exist in the attention economy. They don't exist in maybe even a cultural awareness. And quite intuitively, I stumbled onto this whole field of laboratory images, and images that are used in scientific research, that are of images of specifically laboratory animals that are used in labs. And most of them in the world are these like roundworms. I mean, these worms called C. elegans, and fruit flies. And I decided to go on a kind of an obscure quest of trying to introduce them into attention economy, or try to bring them from this sort of obscurity of being photographed just for science into a field of art and attention economy for a lot of reasons. But it became a new subject for me, and one thing is, for example, I kind of wanted to use this technique that became so successful for me of a cutout, and to use it for something that is more weird, and also something that talks about a reality that is not as shiny and as commercial as the previous period. And another thing is that I was very much interested in how a photograph of an animal can also become its own kind of representational graph, like a diagram, because these were sort of genetically modified worms that were modified in a way that they become fluorescent. And then if you look at them under the microscope, the parts that are fluorescent, they just shine through, and the animal becomes its own data visualization. And they're one of the drivers of, let's say, biotechnological research. There's economical quality to them. They perform economical function just like farm animals do. And they're completely kind of silent, of course. And they look like graphs themselves. They look like arrows a bit. So I went on a crazy productions series of just making a lot of worm sculptures. Instead of making arrows separately and animals separately, I made sculptures of animals that kind of look like arrows, that are genetically modified, so they're not fully animals and they're not fully technology. There's something in between, because there's almost no limit of how far you can go in experimenting on them. And they are tiny, and they live and die really fast and all that. And they were the first animal whose genome was sequenced ever, and they were the first animal whose full brain map was mapped, like a full neural map was done for. So they're kind of a ghost in the shell type of animal. And I started to see some sort of, direction that went into, if you take a pop art and you mix it with H.R. Giger or Cronenberg, that's where it was going. And I almost consciously went against making something that was very viral and easily accessible. These are the fly sculptures. But what it led to is basically my work became more installation based, because none of these sculptures were sort of maybe as iconic on their own, and you had to kind of start making some sort of more layered statements for them. And I started to use more light and installations to really activate everything. And it also got me to the idea of actually trying to make sculptures that are themselves like a mix of nature and technology and some sort of living machine idea. And that's completely sort of maybe unexpected, but I've been developing them since 2014, 15 also. And it became its own kind of ecosystem of trying to come up with again, using existing materials and products that you can find in any shop. I would try to reconfigure these sort of baby swings into sort of artificial insect-like creatures, also using digital, again, imagery, but instead of printing it on flat aluminum, I would print it on resin, and almost approach it as this, like, I almost saw it as like is against like plastic sculpture series, but then making it an AI monster. And there was nothing really AI about them. It was just there was nothing sort of really artificially functioning about them besides kind of the aesthetic. But the aesthetic for me meant a lot because I really wanted to create some like a visual signal that it was very weird and a merge of everything that is artificial, like plastic, resin, 3D models of proteins, products from, very obscure products from different stores, and kind of glue it all together with polyurethane. And generate kind of forms that I've never seen before. That was the goal. That became a goal. And it was for a while. And again, it became a more like an installation-based practice. I don't have a video of them, but they move with sound. And this is just an example of an installation. And they always put them these little laser eyes. And the next trajectory of work kind of continued where this maybe ended with the idea of machine vision. And again, images that are not just created for like laboratories, but images that are created by maybe mechanical automated cameras for other machines to process. So maybe even completely excluding a human factor. And again, I went back to the idea of images of some sort of nature. And I found this, obviously a very easily accessible, but a huge domain of images that were taken by automatic cameras in the middle of forests and savannas all over the world. And there's a lot of data sets of these images and that are, again, taken for research, but they're not taken by like a laboratory mechanic, but just automatic snapshot hunting camera. And they're taken, they're sort of put online with the idea that they will be processed by something like an image processing algorithm. But then there are certain platforms online where they're asked people to classify these images so they can train the algorithm. And I joined some platform like that, and I classified over 7,000 images by now of different like animals in different parts of the world getting into the snapshot, this wildlife camera. And what I found also, for example, was incredible amount of beauty in the compositions and in the quality of the image that was never supposed to be even seen maybe by more than 10 people. And that was really inspiring to me, this idea that there's, a sea of images that are not meant to be seen. And that's quite the opposite from a stock or like from some sort of viral National Geographic image. But this is kind of where my mind went. And and I really also started to admire the camera artifacts and the glitches and all that. And thinking about machine vision, I sort of thought also how, again, about myself as a filter and how, the choice of a composition for a sculpture that I make is also a form of like processing, pattern processing. And there's, of course, these, very old even algorithms that try to isolate the outline of let's say, an animal in an image in the foreground. And it almost looks like what I'm doing when I'm making a sculpture. So again, I started to be more self-aware of this perception of, my own perception as an artist. And these are sort of the series of works that ended up, again, I'm still using the same medium of print on aluminum, but then adding more installation elements, and I think coming from a slightly different perspective than in the beginning. And further on, I was also curious about images made by, this one's supposed to be made by self-driving car that is detecting a deer on the road. And they're even more low resolution and more corrupted than the wildlife camera ones. And this whole also question of non-human perception comes into mind. And this is a rendering of what a dolphin might, this is kind of approximates a vision of a dolphin, how it would see a human being with the clicks, not with full vision, but a mix of, I think, acoustic vision and eyes. And this is, for example, something from the data, one of the data sets that I classified. This is like a deer somewhere in the forest in this very pixelated form, and it's almost like not clear what kind of vision it is anymore. And this is an example of one of the data sets where a drone flew over at night, flew over the savannah, and it was taking pictures in the heat spectrum. So the image is in this heat spectrum, and my classification purpose was to kind of isolate the animals from the noise. And so it's like a drone flying somewhere at night, taking heat, so it just gets crazy. And it reminded me of how kind of the corruption and the distortion of something like a cave painting that is also just on a stone. It is bumpy. It has like tens of thousands of years of erosion. And I decided to kind of replicate that and stop using aluminum and use something that make almost like a fresco or like a kind of a stone cave art representation of these very recent images. And I used the transfer on a synthetic clay. So again, nothing is very natural. Everything is very synthetic, but it approximates something that is like very new and very ancient at the same time. And it also introduces some sort of other material corruption. This transfer is not perfect. On top of the pixelated image, you get kind of scratches and imperfections of the material, which is also almost the opposite of like aluminum dye bond approach from the beginning. These are examples. This is just more from the data sets that I found. There's once in a while you see actually a human being. These are apes. This is not from a data set that I worked with, but I still used it to make sculptures. And then I basically, from then on, I just went more and more into this thinking about algorithmic vision and also algorithmic processing of images. And as everything becomes sort of more driven and modeled on some sort of algorithmic process, even in our social media use, it used to be that the timeline of any social media is just like based on time. So whatever is recent is on top and whatever is old is on the bottom. And then at some point they introduced algorithmic timeline where it was no longer just based on time, it was based on relevancy. So it's just everything kind of stopped being simple and straightforward. And I felt like forced kind of to introduce this idea of an algorithmic aspect in the work. And this, we collaborated with Power Studio as an artist duo, also living in Berlin, on making a collection of stick drawings and kind of, again, something like cave art drawing that is based on several things. We found this scientific paper and a data set that trained on a real cave art in Italy. And then we mixed it with some other references, like a form of a Palm Island in Dubai, and some shapes of brain cells and some other stuff. And this was the result that we got. And they were kind of half human, half animal figures that were, for me, very mysterious. And I decided that I wanted to insert them into the images that I find, almost like a human, like a stand-in for the algorithm or the human hand, to complicate the loop of relationships in the artwork. And then it also became its own series of works.
I wonder if we should have a few questions right now. Like roughly for the presentation, I would give it another 10 minutes, or we insert a bit of a couple of rounds of questions right now, how whatever you feel more comfortable with.
I can also, like 10 minutes is good.
Okay.
I can finish it in 10 minutes, or we can talk about something now.
Now, maybe we just throw one question in because it really starts to go like full circle. Even from a very first piece, your post-internet survival guide, I mean, it speaks of survival. There's something a bit archaic about it, kind of the act of like continuing or wanting to continue to exist, and usually in a situation or condition that's kind of life-threatening. And then you had the bone hanging right next to it. So there's this, you mentioned before, this kind of the ancient and the new, or the archaic and the new. So this friction now is really something that continued in your practice from beginning to end. No,
Yeah.
Always it seems to be like a trait, a signature trait, the clash between the archaic and the new, or the animal and the technology, or even if I think of the clay, basically clay tablets that you just showed, is in a way a reference to like the first medium of writing, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. The oldest writing exists on clay tablets. Yet the tablet is also a computer, and now, like a mobile computer device. And all these kind of all these links, I find it quite fascinating how there's such a red thread, despite you, like after each phase, really changing your oeuvre, or like developing and evolving your oeuvre.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to say the same thing over and over and over again in response to how the world is changing, or like not to say same thing, but look into the same thing. Because in one way, I said, our world compared to the times of post-internet survival guide is very similar, but also in the way it's very different. And so every time something changes, I feel like I have to look at it all again. And it all always starts with some archaic times, because for me, this emergence of vision and of art is really connected to how we are today. Obviously, it's very trivial, but it's very true.
Yeah, but almost brings it back to like the hunter and gatherers in a way. No?
Yeah.
Also the arrow that you have, it's kind of the arrow of exponential growth, as you said, but it's also reminding of a snake, but it's also reminding as the first hunting tool, no? The bow and arrow.
Yeah, I didn't go into that whole thing, but I have one kind of branch of the work is all this Neolithic connection between capitalism, arrows, hunter-gatherers, and emergence of agriculture, and how it all ends up in today's art. But that would be another half an hour.
Yeah.
And that's that's true. I kind of considered to include some of that, but I didn't. And yeah, I guess that's the narrative part that you mentioned at the beginning, that I always find it interesting to trace this narrative. For example, when I see this contemporary image of a deer made by an automatic camera for a data set, the deer is still the deer from the cave art, but now we just have another reason to make an image out of it. And I also think that at the same time, how the deer affects a viewer is still similar a bit on how it did 40,000 years ago. But we're just not fully conscious of that. And there's, of course, certain things that didn't exist 40,000 years ago and how that come into play. And they come into play by association. So maybe a laboratory worm reminds us of a giant snake or a dragon because we don't have a template in our mind for a laboratory worm. So and also this idea of like the material, like the stock image as a way to mix like an economical growth arrow, shooting arrow, a vector, a mathematical vector, all these symbolic layers of understanding and knowledge into some sort of shiny 3D image. So I think maybe to sum it up is that in each very contemporary thing or image you can unpack into this chain of relations that take you all the way back. As you say, a tablet is an iPad has a connection to the clay tablet, and that has a limitation to the size of your hand. So when I was thinking about the size of Post-Internet Survival Guide, the layout, I decided that it will be exactly the same as the dimensions of the first iPad. So the book, in the format of the book, is the same size as the first iPad, because that felt interesting. I don't know if it was interesting. Anyway, oops, I'm out again. Oops.
Too bad.
While you look for it, another thing that we had reoccurring is this kind of loop, and we talked a lot about loops in the lecture series before, like of various things. So Boyo kind of discussed the loop as a sign.
Why am I drawing?
Are you drawing this now?
Why am I drawing?
Some live web art.
I want to get out of this mode. I don't know how.
I kind of like it, actually.
Well, I don't know what to do. Anybody knows what I should do to get out of it?
Maybe close it and open it up again. That's a new one.
In your window, when you hover it, your presentation window, there's like a small marks on the left side.
Yeah, this.
You can choose to draw. I don't know if you can close it there.
Yes, I got out.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
No, finishing my sentence. The thing about loops that we've been discussing, you know, like the loop is the sign of our times, or like the eternal reoccurrence. And you know, when you have also these loops, you take there's an object, an animal. There's an image online. You take that image, you bring it into the exhibition space, and eventually there will be a photo taken of that one, and that goes back online again. So there's this kind of also loop of imagery and corrupted imagery that is a trademark in your
yeah, it just keeps on going. Yeah, exactly. And I unfortunately I'm very like OCD about the documentation photos because of that, because I really always re-edit them myself, even if the photographer is really good. But that's nobody probably notices anything, but I always find it important to kind of treat them as part of the work. And again, because especially now with this more installation practice, like to capture certain moments in the installation, because certain things are moving, there's different lights and stuff. So then for me, it becomes like part of the narration of the work is to try to capture a good documentation image. Because then the exhibition will come and go, but then I need to have these images that tell a certain story that stay after. And I don't know how effective that is, but it just feels like the right way to go. especially because I don't really write texts anymore. I used to write more, but now I don't really have a capacity to. I'm not a writer, so for me to write something is really like it takes a lot of time to write something very short. So I don't really have a lot of opportunity to do that. And so I try to express everything within the work and like talks, not writing. But it would have been interesting to write also about certain things. So yeah, I'm just gonna quickly finish. I made another book that after like 8 years after the first one, that was already now based not on me as an editor processing, well, on me as a designer processing stuff from the internet, but me again collaborating with Power to design like a folder, a data set that then we used to generate a book. So I didn't know how the book would look like until it was done. Basically, I just collected things that I wanted to be like the material to generate the book, and then I asked the designers to make like a meat grinder that they would algorithmically and manually process what I give them, and the output would be something that is unexpected to me and would break through the images and kind of a mix again of my documentation and things that are just found on the internet. And it was, I'm very happy about this book. I think both books I could share as PDFs with the students, by the way.
That would be amazing. That would be absolutely amazing.
Because I don't really, there are certain maybe copyrights on them, but I don't really care. I can share them. There's no real value in selling the PDF, so I think everybody can have a PDF.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
So then it became like almost like a half-baked data set, this book. Okay, I'm gonna skip this. And the sculptures that I recently made, they're sort of more now in the middle of everything, where you have the elements from the early on and then the elements from kind of more this algorithmic content. They're more layered, but they're also, I don't know, I'm trying to get it almost like making the artwork becomes almost like a spread of the book, not just one signal.
And almost like a Rorschach test now, no?
Yeah, also, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it becomes like a kind of a weird hypnotizing Rorschach test pattern. I like the symmetry. I think this will stay in some capacity. And I also think about now that not only people might look at the work, but there's might be some sort of other algorithmic processing of the work and the meaning in the future or now. And I want to confuse the algorithm as much as possible. I want it to be confused. And the last year, already COVID year, 2021, I had a solo exhibition in Amsterdam, a small solo exhibition. And I decided to make an experimental project where I wanted to generate shapes of viruses and proteins to like synthetically, kind of to make them synthetically generated models of proteins and viruses. And we collaborated with another German artist, Maximilian Kreis, to we scraped a data set from a website called Protein Data Bank. It exists. It's a public domain for models, for scientific models. And we got around 12,000 images. And we used StyleGAN to generate forms that look kind of realistically scientific. some of them to appear like a virus or a protein shape that doesn't really exist in nature but could exist. And some of them kind of looked convincing enough if I asked a microbial biologist. And then I made a selection out of them for the best sort of looking shapes. And to my surprise, I wanted to use them in the work, like somehow, a new work in the new exhibition. And we had, thousands of them generated. And to my surprise, maybe 1% or less than 1% of the results looked like human faces or like shape or like masks. And that was not in our training data at all. And that was not in our kind of on the surface, it was not in our algorithm. And most probably it was in the deep structure of the algorithm, and it kind of emerged because of us using this very abstract data set. So some of the results just ended up looking like faces, although we didn't ask for it. And it almost like kind of a human face of the algorithm stared back at us. And I ended up doing like a series of kind of portraits. These are sketches or portraits that had some narrative information juxtaposition onto them as if it's a book, page of a book. But I ended up making a series of resin pieces with them that became kind of a portrait exhibition in this military warehouse, 18th century military warehouse building in the Netherlands. And made a video that was using the actual morphing of the molecular shapes as if it was a petri dish for bacteria growth. It's very nerdy, but I just wanted to go all in. But the point is, for me, was to envision a military arsenal building of the 21st century as basically like a bio repository, or like as a place where biology meets computation. As it turned out, it was already kind of a post-COVID discourse, but I was really on that trajectory from before COVID started, and this just kind of accelerated it. And this is an experiment, so I'm not sure yet where it's going. But I was kind of happy with that. And again, it was more like an installation-based work. And then I also used the results of our generation to make like our NFT project that is based on mutation. So each time there's some activity on the blockchain of like selling or buying, I mean, it's complicated, but each work had a potential to mutate. And I think this is also, again, where maybe I might be going back into the digital sphere, because of course this 2021 was like a year where this whole NFT thing happened, and I'm trying to find an interesting way to approach that, and using the idea of, again, image mutation value as elements in the work, but in a way that I'm not sure yet what I'm doing. But this is kind of the project that happened.
We want still some questions from the students. We have to kind of
I'm done now. And these are just showing, these are the last sketches that I'm doing. Also using some other AI thing.
Wow.
Well, maybe I'll just stay on this and we can do
questions. It's nice if we actually see each other, then otherwise your face is so small.
Okay.
But this is sketches for the new exhibition. Oops, no, you're gone.
Well, they're just sketches now. Yeah. Don't know if it will be the new exhibition.
You somehow disappeared from the camera.
Wait, I think I did too many things too fast, so I'm gonna stop sharing now. Okay.
So first of all, some of you are still gone from the camera, but thank you very much for your presentation and an online applause, and thank you for that.
Thank you, everybody.
A couple of things. First of all, I'm super super grateful for you being so honest about your process, and also how you feel like at certain point ideas feel expired and you need to get onto something new or something else. I think that's very inspirational for all of us listening here. Then I'm also very grateful that you really stress the importance of the documentation of one's work, to the point that you even kind of start working into the images of the photographers. And that's also something I can say often enough to all of you guys now listening, like to properly document your work. That's basically your currency. That's what remains at the end of the day, an image that is found somewhere online. And so be really, really careful and attentive with the documentation of your work. And I totally love the formulation you said, that to unpack the chain of relations that kind of takes us from today all the back to the Neolithic times, And in a way, your artistic oeuvre is a huge process of kind of pattern recognition. One could almost argue.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, at least at attempt at doing that, or like kind of from my own perspective with the limitations of how much I know and how much I read and all that. But also, I think this unpacking is a process of fiction also, because we don't know how it was in the Neolithic or in the Archaic. So each time we think we know, for example, what we knew about the Archaic 12 years ago when I was making post-internet survival guide is not the same as what we know today. This idea of like Neanderthals and all that stuff, it changed already a lot in 10 years. So it's always a process of fiction. So there's a there's a bad way of doing it. And of course, where we can go into these like nativist conversations, but that's not what I'm trying to do always. I'm always trying to just try to find some sort of chain of relations and at the same time not take it too seriously. It's an artistic thing. It's not a scientific or philosophical thing.
Yeah. So guys, for all of you, you can ask questions now. I think it connects a lot of the presentations that we heard before in the last few months, coming together also in a way in a physical form, while last week was solely in the world of web. This kind of translates now the web into the world. So I have enough questions, but so I'll continue. But you guys can still kind of raise your hand. You can write me a question or a Katja question, or just
Yeah, I actually didn't check. Yeah.
No, not yet. Or speak up. So in a way, you could say, I mean, obviously you are, your first piece is called the Post-Internet Survival Guide, and you're kind of you merged in this kind of late 2000 scene, like the post-internet scene, where like you could say, like if you speak traditionally like a sculptor, you would use clay to make a sculpture. You use kind of online footage to kind of create your images.
Mm-hmm.
So, but doing that, what unique possibilities kind of or pitfalls do you think are inherent to the web as an artistic and creative medium and tool, kind of compared to other more classical tools of artistic expression?
Well, I think there is like obviously there's a limit in the medium. It worked. It made sense because it was so primitive. But sometimes I wanted to say something more complex, and I couldn't have the vocabulary because I didn't go to a proper craft-based art school. And sometimes I want to make things that I don't want to outsource, but I also don't know how to make them physically. So there's always this limitation of my physical skills, craft, and it's very simple, but it's crucial because I think if you want to go into sculpture, at some point, I think you have to be aware of some craft, even if it's like 3D modeling as a craft. And so, since I just try to make the best out of my limited skill set, which is like reading, Photoshop, a bit of programming. Okay, what can I do? What can I do with this skill set? And bit by bit, I'm developing it, but I haven't developed it in a crazy way. I'm still see myself pretty limited, but I'm trying to express myself with the skill set that I have. And I think for everybody it's different, and also what you feel comfortable doing. I'm still very I don't browse images as before, but I still have every year I have a folder that is like a folder for this year of images. Images 2022, images 2021, and this is all I find online or I do, and then it's all mixed together. And when I'm thinking about the work, I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm trying to process a narrative out of it or something, some sort of inspiration that triggers me into making an artwork. And it's very intuitive still.
So this is your methodology, basically. Like if you would take us through, like how you would start a project. Is they going through that file with images 2022, and then you see where this takes you to? But what's your
exactly
in working?
And then I think, I remember in 2020, I looked this up, and I'm going to the 2020 folder. I'm like, oh yeah, this is interesting. And then I make a folder for the specific project, and I drop everything in there. And then I open Photoshop and I start sketching. That's it. And then I say, okay, maybe I need to make a 3D model out of that, or I need an algorithm to go further. But in the beginning, it's always like a very collage-based sketch.
But I mean, it starts two-dimensional, but then again, your works are very three-dimensional. They're very like installative, no? Interesting jump that at one point you moved from the digital into the physical, no? To the spatial quality also of images.
I just think the spatial and the physical, it has something that is impossible to capture in the screen, even in the metaverse, even in the virtual environment. There's things that is impossible to capture, and I think it's more interesting to translate all the way into the physical world, because by the time it's translated, it becomes something else, and it's the person, like the people who see it are forced to see it as a real thing. They see it, they encounter it in real life, so then they don't just dismiss it as like this digital collage or something flat and on the screen, because it's much easier to dismiss something flat and on the screen. And I think psychologically, then they're more able to read the work, and also the work is fuller than if it were just digital. That's just how I feel about it.
I have a question.
Yeah. There's a question, yeah.
Question from Augusto. He says, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I've been following your work for years, and it's incredible to be able to have this close approach to your work. My question is oriented towards the future of the internet. From your experience, what has changed with the 2.0 network, and what are your predictions for this new 3.0 network, full of metaverses, cryptocurrencies, and a more and more precise surveillance society? Ooh, good question, Augusto.
Yeah, I think it's changing rapidly, and I'm like not fully on the wave of the latest developments, because I cannot be at the moment. I have a baby, so even in the last year, like everything that happened, it just happened so fast, and I'm now, like as everybody else, I'm trying to understand what is this, the incoming 3.0 internet is going to be. I'm not fully on board. I'm fully dismissive yet, because I think time will tell, and there'll be bad players and good players in it. And maybe it's also the time when something before things settle, something can be really, something exciting can be developed. And just like maybe with with the second internet and the first internet, as soon as things do settle, that's when they become truly tyrannical. And in the moment when they're not fully settled yet, maybe some things are possible, or maybe it feels like they're possible. So I'm curious about sort of the experimental side of crypto. Metaverses, I don't know. I don't really like VR experience, just sensually. But I like video games, so maybe I do like it. I don't know. And in terms of like economy, it's still it could turn very bad very fast. I mean, I'm not saying anything interesting, but I'm basically saying that it's sort of too early to say. Maybe it's this sort of internet boom moment that was in early 2000s, late 90s, and it will all bust and something fresh emerges that is less hysterical. But at the same time, in order to understand it, I've been dabbling with NFTs and trying to think what it is, how to do something interesting, what is everybody else doing that is somewhat interesting. Because I think if I will not fully understand it if I don't take part in it somehow. So yeah, I think I'm on this page. Maybe in a year I would be able to have a more interesting answer, to give a more interesting answer. But
another question from the audience, you guys, feel free. No, don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I was wondering while I fill the gap here, and you can just interrupt me, guys. By the way, no. Because you said like you studied at the Sandberg Institute graphic design, and I think before you studied semiotics or cultural studies,
yeah,
Estonia. But then now you're practicing, and then you were a curator first, and then becoming an artist. But how did these different studies as well places? Because you're from Estonia, you studied first in Estonia, then I think in Germany, in Lübeck for a while, and then in Amsterdam. So how did these different studies and places shape your practice and your way of working?
Yeah, I think in Estonia, the thing is, growing up, I didn't really, the contemporary art of the time I saw, I knew I didn't like it. And so I always thought that I would be more into media design and media kind of field. Even when I was studying semiotics, I took a minor degree in like applied media art from an art school back there, and so semiotics really helped to like learn how to read philosophy and learn how to understand academic texts, and learn a lot about sort of the history of philosophy, specifically from the semiotic angle, which is a science about sign systems and signifiers and symbolism and all that. And on the other hand, I was almost like imagining myself to become a web designer or a web application maker or graphic designer for the internet. And when I came to Lübeck, I went to study new media design, new media. It was master in new media, and it was this early 2000s anomaly where some universities would open international new media courses for international students from all over the world, and they were kind of functioning as hubs of interdisciplinary research. And we had like some art courses, some some like internet architecture courses, and some social science courses. And I had a privilege of like having somebody like Frieder Nake be my professor there, who is this early internet artist, one of the most famous early internet artists from Germany. And he was a professor at Bremen, and he came to us several times to give talks about 3D graphics. And then from there, I ended up in the graphic design master program in Netherlands, where I thought this will all sum it up, and then I'll become this like something like a new media artist. And while I was there, I started to become friends with people who were doing sort of this early post-internet art, where internet art was mixed with contemporary art. So it's a mix of like, internet art and Andy Warhol or something. And I got very inspired from that. And then I felt like that was my train to jump on. But it took many years, basically, since I graduated high school to get there. And it was also just a moment in time when that was emerging. And so I just didn't fully understand who I was, because where I grew up, there was very little history of contemporary art that spoke to me. I mean, there's a lot of contemporary art in Estonia, but back then, for some reason, it didn't speak to me. And what I found in Germany, going to Transmediale, and in Amsterdam, going to all these little art events, that kind of convinced me that this is a trajectory to take. And then I told myself that if I'm not capable of staying an artist until I'm 30, then I'll find myself another job. But then I'll just give myself a time until I'm 30 to try to become an artist.
Seem to have worked. But it's interesting also, I think the Sandberg Institute is a special place. I mean, I myself ran a master's program there, because it's a very hybrid place, no, where the differentiation between the different departments is not so clear. There's a very artistic approach, let's say, to graphic design, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Augusto has another question. He's asking, do you think there's a connection with Harun Farooqi's films that question the machines of vision with your work in understanding the digital vision made by a computer? That's question number one.
I definitely got inspired by his work. I saw his work about the Iraq soldiers quite early on, in very early 2010s, I think. And it was deeply inspiring, but I saw only a few works of him. So it was one of the references, definitely. Also, of course, works of Hita Starrell were inspiration, and how she translated, or like Farooqi's work, and still remains so. I think I'm always like, I find it difficult to be more openly political, because I find it like I find it violent a bit to work with heavy topics. But maybe another reference I would use is Benjamin Bratton and his work about the what he calls like stacks, and he specifically is the one who says, images that are made by machines for other machines, this type of phrases. This has also been a big reference. And many other peers. Basically, most inspiration I get is from my peers.
I was thinking philosophy, Manuel de Landa or something. I was thinking of when looking at your work, because he was also quite inspirational, or he was quite early on to the topic. But Augusto, a follow-up question. Since the Telegram and WhatsApp stickers boom started in Berlin, I have started to collect them systematically. do you have any advice on how to build a digital archive or some digital image preservation technique?
I think you should look on rhizome.org about that, because rhizome.org is this institution in New York that started to really focus on archival practices for internet art and digital art. And they have a lot of material on that. So go to rhizome.org and look into that. But I'm bad at this. I'm very bad at organizing files. I'm very bad at saving my own files. I lost the files from the post-internet survival guide work files on the hard drive. Don't ask me about archival practices. I'm not good at this. I just screenshot everything and then keep copying everything into some cloud and then another cloud, and then if I lose one, I have another, and then it's never complete. And
nice. Guys, so this is your last chance to ask a question. Otherwise, we come to our classic final question for each speaker. So if there's another question, it's now or never.
I have to run to because I hear the baby is freaking out already. So let's do that.
Quickly. Make it very quick. So, Katja, thank you so much for everything. Final piece of advice. What piece of advice could you give all the becoming artists, designers, musicians, architects, etc., listening to us today?
Very, very difficult to answer something to this very profound question. My advice is just to really trust your instinct and develop whatever aspect of whatever topic or whatever medium you want, but just stay pure to yourself as much as you can. And then you can judge it later. But first you have to make something before you judge it. So don't stop yourself from making it and following whatever instinct you have. Just do it. Do it for 2 semesters. Nobody likes it. Keep on doing it. And then when you feel like you're done, then you can decide if you want to continue or not. But first try to do it. I think the problem is you try to criticize yourself before you even start doing anything or finishing something. And I always just say, finish it. Just finish an album, finish an exhibition. You can always make a new one, but just do it. That's my recommendation. Because, it's good to be critical, but if you're a student especially, you just have to be shameless and try stuff out. And then you learn on your mistakes.
Thank you so much for this one, Katja. This is very wise words at the very end. Again, a big applause online.
Thanks, everybody.
You have to run to your kid now. You guys stay online. Don't leave the group. It was amazing getting such a in-depth and honest, intimate kind of view into your practice. Thanks so much again. I let you run.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Katja. You guys stay online for a moment. Thank you. Take care and have a nice evening.
Bye.